Egyptian Mythology, Gods and Goddesses of Ancient Egypt, written by Harper Van Stalen. Read for you by Chloe Jacobson. Chapter 1. Ancient Egyptian Gods and Goddesses. For all age-old people, the world was filled with mystery. Much of what they experienced in the world around them was unknowable and frightening. The old Egyptian gods and goddesses represented aspects of the Egyptians' natural and supernatural environments, and helped them understand its many elements. Devils. Demons were more effective than human beings, but not as powerful as gods. They were typically never ceasing, could be in more than one place at a time, and could affect the world and also people in supernatural ways. Yet, there were certain limitations to their powers, and they were neither all-powerful nor all-understanding. Among devils, the most crucial figure was Amut, the devourer of the dead. Part crocodile, part lioness, and part hippopotamus, she was usually shown near the scales on which the hearts of the dead were weighted against the feather of truth. She feasted on the hearts of those whose wicked deeds in life made them unfit to get in the afterlife. Apepi, another crucial satanic force, in some cases called Apapus, was the enemy of the sun god in his day-to-day cycle through the universe and is illustrated as a gigantic snake. Ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses. Most Egyptian gods were represented one concept aspect of the world. Ra was the sun god, for example, and Nut was the goddess of the sky. The characters of the gods were not clearly specified. Most were typically kind-hearted, but their favor could not be counted on. Some gods were spiteful and needed to be pacified. Some, such as Neith, Sekhmet, and Mut, had changeable characters. The god Seth, who killed his brother, Osiris, embodied the malicious and disordered aspects of the world. The physical form taken on by the different Egyptian gods was generally a combination of human and animal, and many were associated with several animal species. An animal could show a deity's mood. When a god was upset, she might be depicted as a ferocious lioness. When gentle, a cat. The convention was to portray the animal gods with a body and an animal head. The opposite convention was sometimes used for representations of a king, who may be portrayed with a human head and a lion's body, as in the case of the Sphinx. Sphinxes may also appear with other heads, specifically those of rams or falcons. Most of the deities were represented only in human form. Amongst these were such really age-old figures as the celestial gods Shu of the air, Geb of the earth, the fertility god Min, and the artisan Ta. There were some minor gods that took on grotesque forms, including but not limited to Bez, a dwarf with a mask-like face, and Tart, a goddess whose physical form combined the functions of a hippopotamus and a crocodile. Nut, Shu, and Geb. Nut was the mother of Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys. Nut is normally shown in human form. Her lengthened body represented the sky. Each limb represents a cardinal point as her body stretches over the earth. Nut swallowed the setting sun, Ra, each night and brought him to life each morning. She is usually depicted on the ceilings of tombs, on the inside cover of coffins, and on the ceilings of temples. Shu was the spouse of Tefnut and the father of Nut and Geb. He and his marriage partner were the first gods created by Atum. Shu was the god of the air and sunlight, or more exactly, dry air, and his spouse represented wetness. He was usually depicted as a man wearing a headdress in the form of a plume, which is also the hieroglyph for his name. Shu's function was to hold up the body of the goddess Nun and separate the sky from the earth. He wasn't a solar deity, but his role in providing sunshine connected him to Ra. Undoubtedly, he was one of the few gods who escaped mistreatment under the heretic king Akhenaten. Geb was the father of Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys, and was a god without a cult. As an earth god, he was associated with fertility, and it was really believed that earthquakes were the laughter of Geb. He is pointed out in the pyramid texts as being behind bars and buried dead within his body. Amun, also called Amen, Amun, Amon. Amun was the primary Theban divine being whose power grew as the city of Thebes grew from an insignificant town in the Old Kingdom to an effective metropolis in the Middle and New Kingdoms. He rose to end up being the client of the Theban pharaohs and was ultimately combined with sun god Ra, who had been the dominant divine being of the Old Kingdom, to end up being Amun-Ra, king of the gods and ruler of the great Ennead. Amun's name means hidden one, mystical form, and although he's most often represented as a human wearing a double-plumed crown, he is, in some cases, portrayed as a ram or goose. The ramification is that his true identity can never, ever be revealed. Karnak was Amun's chief temple, but his fame extended well past the boundaries of Egypt. His cult infected Ethiopia, Nubia, Libya, and through much of Palestine. The Greeks thought he was an Egyptian manifestation of their god, Zeus. Even Alexander the Great thought it worthwhile seeking advice from the oracle of Amun. Anubis, protector of the dead. Anubis is shown as a jackal-headed man, or as a jackal. His dad was Seth, and his mother, Nephthys. His cult center was Sinopolis, now known as El-Kes. He was carefully connected with mummification as a protector of the dead. It was Anubis who performed the deceased to the Hall of Judgment. Bastet. Bastet is depicted as a woman with a feline's head, or just a feline. Originally an avenging lioness divine being, she progressed into a goddess of pleasure. Her cult center was in the town of Bubastis, in the western delta. Most cats lived at her temple and were mummified when they passed away. An immense cemetery of mummified cats has been discovered in the area. Bes. Unlike the other gods, Bes is represented full face instead of in profile, as a grotesque, bandy-legged dwarf with his tongue protruding. He was related to good times and home entertainment, but was also considered a guardian god of childbirth. Bes chased away devils of the night and secured people from harmful animals. Hapji. Hapji was not the god of the river Nile, but of its induation. He is represented as a pot-bellied man with boobs and a headdress made of water plants. He was thought to live in the caves of the very first cataract, and his cult center was at Aswan. Hathor. Hathor was the daughter of Ra and the client goddess of women, love, beauty, pleasure, and music. She is portrayed in three forms: as a cow, as a woman with ears of the cow, and as a woman wearing the headdress of a cow's horns. In this last manifesting, she holds the solar disk between her horns. She was the accompaniment of Horus, and her name actually means House of Horus. She had many temples, the most popular of which is at Dendara. There was a dark side to Hathor. It was actually believed that Ra sent her to penalize the human race for its wickedness. But Hathor wreaked such bloody havoc on Earth that Ra was horrified and determined to bring her back. He tricked her by preparing vast amounts of beer blended with mandrake and the blood of the slain. Killing humanity was thirsty work, and when Hathor drank the beer, she ended up being so drunk that she could not continue her slaughter. Each year, the goddess Hathor visited her partner, the god Horus, at Edfu Temple to celebrate the feast of the divine union. Horus. Horus was the son of Osiris and Isis, and the enemy of the wicked god Seth. He is depicted as a hawk, or as a guy with a head of a hawk. In some cases, he is revealed as a youth with a sidelock seated on his mother's lap. He was the god of the sky and the divine protector of kings. Horus was worshipped throughout Egypt and was particularly associated with Edfu, the site of the ancient city of Messene, where his temple can still be seen. There are many stories of his wars against his uncle Seth, who killed his father and usurped the throne. Eventually, Horus defeated Seth and became the king of Egypt. Isis. A very important figure in the Old World, Isis was the spouse of Osiris and the mother of Horus. She was associated with funeral rites and said to have made the first mummy from the dismembered parts of Osiris. As the enchantress who resurrected Osiris and gave birth to Horus, she was also the provider of life, a healer, and protector of kings. Isis is represented with a throne on her head and, at times, revealed breastfeeding to the baby Horus. In this manifestation, she was known as Mother of God. To the Egyptians, she represented the ideal spouse and mother, loving, dedicated, and caring. Her most famous temple is at Philae, though her cult spread throughout the Mediterranean world and, during the Roman period, extended as far as northern Europe. There was even a temple dedicated to her in London. Khefer, also called Khepri, Khefra, Khefera, and Khepri, was a creator god illustrated as a scarab beetle or as a man with a scarab for a head. The Egyptians observed young scarab beetles emerging spontaneously from balls of dung and associated them with the process of creation. Khefer was one of the first gods, self-created, and his name means he who has come into being. Adam took his form as he rose out of the chaotic waters of the Nun in the development myth. It was thought that Khefer rolled the sun across the sky in the exact same way a dung beetle rolls balls of dung across the ground. Khnum. Khnum was illustrated as a ram-headed man. He was a god of the cataracts, a potter, and a creator god who guarded the source of the Nile. His sanctuary was on Elephantine Island, but his best-preserved temple is at Esna. The famine stele, which is a carved stone tablet, contains interest, kunim, throughout a starvation brought on by a low inundation of the Nile. Khonsu, also referred to as Khons, Khensu, Khuns. Khonsu was the child of Amun and Mut, with whom he formed the Theban triad. He was a moon god portrayed as a guy with a falcon head wearing a crescent moon headdress surmounted by the full lunar disk. Like Thoth, who was also a lunar divine being, he is at times represented by a baboon. Khonsu was really believed to have the ability to drive out fiends. Ramses II sent a statue of Khonsu to a friendly Syrian king in order to treat his daughter of a disease. His temple was within the precincts of Karnak. Ma'at. Ma'at was the goddess of truth and justice. Embodying the essential harmony of the vast universe, she was illustrated as a seated woman wearing an ostrich feather, or in some cases, just as the feather itself. Her power controlled the seasons and the movement of the stars. Ma'at was the client of justice and the symbol of ancient Egyptian principles. So, the vizier, who supervised the law courts, went by the title Priest of Ma'at. Ma'at was the supreme judge in the afterlife, and the heart of the recently deceased was weighed against her plume in the Hall of Two Truths. And Mut, devourer of the dead, ate those that failed her test. Montu. Montu was a warrior god who rose to end up being the state god during the 11th dynasty. He was related to King Montuahep. Montu is gratified, who reunited Upper and Lower Egypt after the turmoil of the First Intermediate Period. During the 12th dynasty, Montu was displaced by the rise of Amun, but handled the true characteristics of a war god when warrior kings like Thutmose III and Ramses II recognized themselves with him. Mut. Mut formed part of the Theban triad. She was just one of the daughters of Ra, the wife of Amun, and mother of Khonsu. She was the vulture goddess, and is usually portrayed as a woman with long, brightly colored dress and a vulture headdress surmounted by the double crown. In her more aggressive aspect, she is revealed as a lion-headed goddess. Like Isis and Hathor, Mut played the role of divine mother to the king. Her amulets, which depict her as a seated woman nursing a kid, are sometimes confused with those of Isis. Nephthys, daughter of Geb and Nut, sister of Isis, partner of Seth, and mother of Anubis. Nephthys is illustrated as a woman with the hieroglyphs for a palace and Neb, a basket, on her head. She is therefore known as Woman of the Mansions or Palace. Nephthys was revolted by Seth's murder of Osiris and helped her sister Isis against her husband Seth. Together with Isis, she was a protector of the dead, and they're typically revealed together on coffin cases with winged arms. She seems to have had no temple or cult center of her own. Osiris. Osiris was initially a greenery god related to the development of crops. He was the mythological first king of Egypt and one of the most crucial of the gods. It was thought that he brought society to the race of mankind. He was murdered by his brother Seth, brought back to life by his wife Isis, and went on to become the ruler of the underworld and judge of the dead. He is generally illustrated as a mummy holding the criminal and flail of kingship. On his head he is wearing the right crown of Upper Egypt, flanked by 2 plumes of feathers. Sometimes he is shown with the horns of a ram. His skin is illustrated as blue, the color of the dead, black, the color of the fertile earth, or green, representing resurrection. Osiris's head was thought to have been buried at Abydos, his main cult center. Each year during his festival, there was a procession and a reenactment of his story in the form of a mystery play. Ptah. Ptah was a developer god, said to have made the world from the thoughts in his heart and his words. He was depicted as a mummy with his hands extending from the wrappings and holding a personnel. His head was shaven, and he wore a skull cap. Ptah was related to craftsmen, and the high priest of his temple at Memphis held the title Great Leader of Craftsmen. Ra, also referred to as Re. The supreme sun god was represented as a man with the head of a hawk, crowned with a solar disk, and the sacred serpent. Even so, in the underworld through which he passes each night, he is portrayed as a ram head. Every day Ra took a trip across the sky in the form of the sun, riding in his solar boat, and each night he journeyed through the underworld, where he beat the allies of turmoil. He was born again each morning in the form of daybreak. His influence on the other gods was so strong that he subsumed tons of their identities. Therefore, Amun ended up being Amun-Ra, Montu ended up being Montu-Ra, and Horus became Ra-Horakethi. Pharaoh, Akhenaten's god, the Aten, was another form of Ra, the solar disk. The Egyptian kings said to come down from Ra and called themselves the child of Ra. His cult was very effective throughout the period of the Old Kingdom, when sun foreheads were built in his honor. His cult center was at Heliopolis, which nowadays is covered by the northern suburban areas of Cairo, Sobek. Sobek was a crocodile god, illustrated as a crocodile on an altar, or as a guy with a crocodile head wearing a headdress in the form of the sun disk with upright plumes and horns. Sobek's primary cult centers were at Medet el Fayim and the temple of Kom Ombo, which he shared with Horus and which still exists today. There was a pool at Kom Ombo containing holy crocodiles, and it is still possible to see original mummified crocodiles at the temple. Seth, also called Set, Setek, Sutui, and Sutike. Seth was the son of Geb and Nut and the wicked brother of Osiris. He was the god of darkness, mayhem, and confusion, and is represented as a man with an unidentified animal head, usually described as a Typhonian by the Greeks, who associated him with the god Typhon. He is in some cases depicted as a hippopotamus, a pig, or a donkey. Seth murdered his brother and took over the throne of Egypt, and the majority of the other gods hated him. Horus eventually defeated Seth, but it was thought that their battle was an eternal struggle between good and wicked. Although Seth couldn't keep the throne of Egypt, he went on to be a buddy of Ra. He at times accompanied Ra across the sky in his solar boat, causing storms and bad weather. Seth was venerated by some, and his main cult center was at Nakara. Some kings would liken themselves to Seth in fight, but for the most part, the people loathed him, and his defeat by Horus was routinely celebrated. Tefnut. Tefnut was the marriage partner of Shu and mother of Nut and Geb. She and her partner were the first gods created by Atum. She was the goddess of wetness or damp, corrosive air, and was depicted either as a lioness or as a woman with a lioness's head. Thoth. Thoth was the god of writing and knowledge, and was depicted as a man with the head of an ibis holding a scribe's pen and palette, or as a baboon. The Greeks associated him with Hermes and credited him with the innovation of all the sciences and the development of writing. He is usually portrayed writing or making computations. Thoth differs from the majority of other gods. He was as old as the oldest gods and usually functioned as an intermediary between gods. He was connected with the moon and, as in some cases shown, wearing a moon disk and crescent headdress. One of his most crucial roles was to make a record of the deeds of the dead at their day of judgment, and is often seen doing this in the Book of the Dead. His main temple was at Hermopolis in Middle Egypt. Chapter 2. The Peasant and the Workman. A tale of the 9th dynasty from which the number of copies extant would seem to have been incredibly popular, relates how a peasant succeeded in obtaining justice after he had been robbed. Justice was not extremely easily obtained in Egypt in those times, for it appears to have been requisite that a peasant should attract the judge's attention by some unique means, if in his case were to be heard at all. The story runs hence. In the Salt country, there dwelt a Shekti peasant with his family. He made his living by trading with Hennesetin in salt, netron, rushes, and other items of his nation, and as he journeyed thither, he had to travel through the lands of the house of Phefa. Now there stayed by the canal a guy named Tehuti Necht, the child of Asiri, a serf to the high steward Merowit Ensa. Tehuti Necht had so far intruded on the course, for roadways and courses were not protected by law in Egypt, as in other countries, that there was but a narrow strip left, with the canal on one side and a cornfield on the other. When Tehuti Necht saw the Sekti approaching with his strained asses, his wicked heart yearned for the beasts and the goods they bore, and he called out to the gods to open a way for him to steal the possessions of the Sekti. This was the plan he conceived. "I will take," said he, "a shawl and will spread it on the course, if the Sekti drives his asses over it. And there's no other way, then I will easily select a quarrel with him." He had no earlier thought about the project than it was brought into impact. A servant at Tehuti Necht's building fetched a shawl and spread it over the path so that one end was in the water and the other among the corn. When the Sekti drew nigh, he drove his asses over the shawl. He had no option. "Hold!" sobbed Tehuti Necht with his simulated wrath. "Certainly you don't intend to drive your beasts over my outfits." "I'm going to try to keep from them," responded the good-natured peasant, and he caused the rest of his asses to pass higher up amongst the corn. "Do you then drive your asses through my corn?" said Tehuti Necht, more wrathfully than ever. "There is no other way," said the bothered peasant. "You have blocked the path with your shawl, and I should leave the path." While the two argued upon the matter, one of the asses helped itself to a mouthful of corn, whereupon Tahuti Neck's plaints broke out afresh. "Witness!" he sobbed. "Your ass is eating my corn. I'm going to take your ass, and he will pay for the theft." "Shall I be robbed," sobbed the Shakti, "in the lands of the Lord Stewart Meritusina, who treateth robbers so heartily? Behold, I'll go to him. He won't suffer this misdeed of thine." "Thinkest thou will he hearken to thy plaint?" sneered Tahuti Neck. "Poor as thou art, who will concern himself with thy issues? Lo, I'm the steward, Meritusina." And so saying, he beat the Shakti sorely, took all his asses and drove them into pasture. In vain, the Shakti wept and implored him to restore his property. Tahuti Neck bade him to hold his peace, threatening to send him to the demon of silence if he continued to complain. However, the Shakti petitioned him for an entire day. At length, finding that he was squandering his breath, the peasant betook himself to Henan Nesut, there to lay his case before the Lord Stewart Meritusina. On his arrival, he found the latter preparing to embark in his boat, which was to carry him to the judgment hall. The Shakti bowed himself to the ground and told the Lord Steward that he had a grievance to lay before him, hoping to send one of his followers to hear the tale. The Lord Steward granted the suppliant's request and sent him out from one amongst his train. To the messenger, the Shakti exposed all that had befallen him on his journey, the manner in which Tahuti Neck had closed the path in order to force him to trespass on the corn, and the ruthlessness with which he had been beaten and stolen his property. In due time, these matters were told to the Lord Steward, who laid the case before the nobles who were with him in the judgment hall. "Let this Shakti bring a witness," they said. "If he established his case, it could be needed to beat Tahuti Neck, or perchance he will be made to pay a trifle for the salt and natron he has taken." The Lord Steward said nothing, and the Shakti himself came on to him and hailed him as the greatest of the great, the orphan's dad, the widow's husband, the guide of the clingy, and so on. Very eloquent was the Shakti, and in his forelord speech he masterfully combined eulogy with his plea for justice. So the Lord Steward was interested and flattered in spite of himself. Now at that time there sat on the throne of Egypt the king Nebuchadnezzar, and to him came the Lord Steward Metanerissa, saying, "See, my lord, I have sought by a Shakti whose items were taken, most eloquently of mortals is he. What would my lord that I do unto him?" "Do not answer his speeches," said the king, "but put his words in writing and bring them to us. See that he and his spouse and children are supplied with meat and drink, but do not let him know who provides it." The Lord Steward did as the king had commanded him. He provided to the peasant an everyday ration of bread and beer, and to his partner sufficient corn to feed herself and her children. However, the Shakti knew not whence the provisions came. A second time the peasant sought the judgment hall to put forth his complaint to the Lord Steward, and yet a third time he came, and the Lord Steward commanded that he be beaten with slaves to see whether he would desist. Still no, the Shakti came a fourth, a fifth, a sixth time, striving with pleasant speeches to open the ear of the judge. Meridensa hearkened to him not. Yet the Shakti didn't misery, but returned unto the 9th time. And at the 9th time the Lord Steward sent 2 of his followers to the Shakti, and the peasant shivered extremely, for he feared that he was about to be beaten once again just because of his importunity. The message, though, was an assuring one. The Lord Steward declared that he had been considerably thrilled by the peasant's eloquence and would see that he got fulfillment. He then triggered the Shakti's petitions to be written on a clean papyri and sent to the king, according as the king had commanded. Nebuchadnezzar was so much delighted with the speeches, but the giving of judgment he left totally in the hands of the Lord Steward. Meridensa, for his reasons, deprived Tahuti Neck of all his offices and his property, and gave them to the Shekti, who thenceforth dwelt at the king's palace with all his family. And the Shekti became the primary overseer of Nebka-Enra and was significantly cherished by him. Chapter 3. Isis and the 7 Scorpions. Whenever Isis left Horus at night while they were hiding in the papyrus swamps near Buto, she was joined by 7 scorpions. 3 of the scorpions preceded her, Petet, Tejet, and Matet, and made certain that the path ahead was safe. At her side were the scorpions Mesketet and Meseteef, bringing up the back were Tephin and Bethin. Every night, Isis cautioned her companions to be very careful regarding avoiding alerting Seth as to where she was. She would remind them not to speak with anybody they met along the way. One night, Isis was taking a trip to the town of the 2 sisters in the Nile Delta. A wealthy noblewoman saw the weird party show up and rapidly shut the door to her home. The scorpions were infuriated at her rude behavior and chose to teach the woman a lesson. In preparation, 6 of the scorpions gave their individual toxins to Tephin, who loaded his stinger with it. In the meantime, a simple peasant girl had offered her basic home as a sanctuary to Isis. The scorpion's anger was not ameliorated by the young girl's compassion toward their girlfriend, and Tephin snuck out of the house. He crawled under the door of the noblewoman's house and stung her son. Distraught, the woman roamed through the town looking for help for her kid who was on the verge of death. Isis heard the woman's sobs for help. Even though the woman was unkind to her, Isis could not bear the thought of death of an innocent child and entrusted the woman to help her son. Isis held the boy in her arms and spoke words of great magic. She named each of the scorpions and thus controlled them, rendering their combined poison to be harmless in the kid. The noblewoman was humbled by Isis's genuine generosity and offered all of her worldly wealth to Isis and the peasant girl who had revealed hospitality to a total stranger. Chapter 4. The Great Queen Hatshepsut. Amon-Re, the king of the gods, sat on his throne and watched out on Egypt. Currently he spoke to the put-together council of the gods, to Thoth and Khonsu and Kenmu, to Isis and Osiris, Nephthys, Horus, Harmachis, Anubis, and the rest, saying, "There has been many a pharaoh in the land of Kem, in the double land of Egypt, and some of them have been great and have pleased me well. Khefu and Khepra and Menkaura, long ago who raised the great pyramids of Giza, Amenhotep and Thutmose of today who have caused the peoples of the world to bow down at my feet. Now is the dawning of the golden age in Egypt, and it enters into my mind to produce a great queen to rule over Kem. Yes, I will unify the 2 lands in peace for her. I will give her rule over the whole world, over Syria and Nubia besides Egypt, yes, even to the far distant land of Punt." Then said Isis in her silvery voice that sounded like the shaken bells on her sistrum, "Father of gods and men, no queen has yet ruled in Egypt. In the holy land of Kem, save only one. When the good god Osiris had passed into the Duat, and the good god Horus was still but a child, while Seth the evil, the dreadful one, stalked unchanged up and down the land. Dad of gods and men, you create such a queen. My blessing and wisdom shall be upon her." Then Thoth spoke. Thoth, the thrice wise from whom clears were hid. "O Amon-Re, Lord of the 2 lands, King of the gods, Maker of men, hearken to my words. In the royal place at Thebes, set in the Black Land, the wealthy nation that Khemenu has made fertile with the dark mud of the Indunation, dwells a maiden. Amez is her name, and none in all the world is fairer than she, nor more beautiful in all her limbs. She is the new maid bride-to-be of the good god Pharaoh Thutmose, who has but now gone back to Thebes after his conquest past the Great Green Sea in the lands of the Syrians and the Apura. She alone can be the mother of the great queen, whom you are going to create as the ruler of the two lands. She rests alone in the palace of Pharaoh. Come, let us go to her." So Thoth took upon himself his favorite form, that of an ibis, in which he could fly promptly through the air unacknowledged by any. In this guise he flew into the palace of Thutmose at Thebes, to the great chamber with its paned walls where Queen Ahmes lay asleep. Then Thoth cast a spell over the palace so that each living thing slumbered. Only the pharaoh king Thutmose himself appeared to be awake, and yet it appeared that it was only his body which did not sleep. For, as if he were already dead, his three spiritual parts, the Ba, or soul, the Ka, or double, and the Cow, or spirit, left his body and gathered about it where it lay on the royal bed, as they would in days to come when the good Pharaoh Thutmose would be left to lie in his sleep, deep tomb chamber, beneath the Valley of the Kings, till the coming of Osiris. Yet the body of Thutmose now rose from the bed, and the Ka took its place, lying there in the likeness of the king himself, while the bachelor's degree, like a bird with the human head of the Ku and a tongue of flame, hovered over it. Now for a space the body of Thutmose was the dwelling place of the Amun-Re, the greatest of the gods, the maker and the father of the gods and guys, and of all on the earth. Great was his majesty and superb his accessories. On his neck was the glittering collar of precious stones that only Pharaoh might wear, and on his arms were Pharaoh's bracelets of pure gold and electrum. But on his head were two plumes, and by these alone may it be understood that here was Amun-Re. Yet it appeared as though light shone from him, for as he passed through the dark palace, hall and chamber and corridor shone and faded in turn, as if the sun shone in them for an area, and after that was veiled behind a cloud. And as he passed and faded there lingered behind the fragrance, since the richest fragrances that originate from the land of Punt. He came to the sleeping palace of Queen Ahmes, and the double doors of ebony bound with silver opened before him and closed when he had passed. He found the queen lying like a gem on the golden sofa that was shaped like a lion. He seated himself on the couch, and he held her nostrils, Amun-Re's divine sign of life, and the breath of life entered her as she breathed, and the sofa rose and drifted in the air. After that, waking or asleep, it appeared to Queen Ahmes that she was bathed in light, so that she could see absolutely nothing above or right below or round about her but the golden mist, save only the form of her husband, the Pharaoh Thutmose, who spoke in a voice that appeared to echo away in the distance, saying, "Rejoice, most lucky of women, for you will bear a child who be the kid of Amun-Re, who will rule over the two lands of Egypt and be sovereign of the whole world." Then Queen Ahmes sank into deep and dreamless sleep, while the form of Thutmose sped up back to where the bachelor's degree and the Ku hovered above the bed on which lay his Ka. A minute later, Thutmose lay there sleeping as if nothing had happened, while the bachelor's degree and the Ka and the Ku had faded from the sight. But Amun-Re, dad of gods and men, summoned him to Kemenu, the fashioner, and said, "Mold clay on your wheel, potter who forms the bodies of humanity, and make my daughter Hatshepsut, who will be born to Ahmes and Thutmose in the royal palace of Thebes." And when the time came, Hatshepsut was born amidst the rejoicing of all of Egypt, and lay in her cradle beside the royal bed in a great room lit only by the moonlight. Then once again, in the silence of deep sleep fell upon all of the palace of Thebes. And currently, the double doors opened of themselves, and Amun-Re entered in his own similarity, attended by Hathor, the goddess of love, and her 7 daughters, the Hathors, who weave the web of life for all who are born on this earth. Then Amun-Re blessed the baby Hatshepsut, taking her up in his arms and giving her the kiss of power, so she may undoubtedly end up being a great queen, as his daughter should. And the Hathors wove the golden web of her life as Amun-Re directed, and they wove it appeared to pass before the eyes of Queen Ahmes so she saw her daughter's life set out before her. She saw Hatshepsut was a gorgeous girl kneeling in the temple of Karnak, or eastern Thebes, while Amun-Re and Horus put the waters of filtration upon her head, while the other gods and goddesses gathered in the shadows between the great columns to bless her. Then she saw that Hatshepsut, beside her human dad Pharaoh Thutmose, journeying all through the land of Egypt, from Tanis on the delta to Elephantine in the south, hailed by all as the great queen-to-be. She saw Hatshepsut being crowned as Pharaoh of Egypt, the only woman ever to wear the double crown, save for Cleopatra, the Greek, who was to produce Egypt's fall 1,500 years later. Then she saw her seated in state, while the kings of the earth bowed down before her, bringing her gifts from the ends of the earth. And she saw Hatshepsut's great exploration to the distant Punt, the ships cruising out of the Red Sea, and far on the waters of the ocean past to reach it on the coast of Central Africa. She saw the beehive huts of the black dwellers in Punt, built on stacks in the water and overshadowed by palms and incense trees, with ladders leading up to the entryways. And then she saw the exploration going back to Egypt and bringing all of the treasures from Punt to the pharaoh Hatshepsut, and of how she devoted them to her dad Amun-Re, Horus weighing the gold in his scales, and Thoth jotting down the measures of the incense, and the good god Hatshepsut put herself offering the best of all she had before the ritualistic boat of Amun-Re that was brought by the priests of Thebes. Last of all, she saw the masons and the carvers and the artists making the great morgue temple of Hatshepsut, eliminating and painting on its walls of all the pictures that she had seen in the web of fate the Hathors were weaving before her on this night of the Hatshepsut's birth. All things were fulfilled even as Queen Amez had seen. And Egypt reached its biggest magnificence under Hatshepsut and under her nephew Thutmose III, who succeeded her. And all the tale is told in pictures and hieroglyphs in Del-Ir-Bahiri, the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut in western Thebes, which still represents all to see. Chapter 5. The Princess of Bectin. The king of Egypt, most likely Ramses III, was in the country of Nehern, a portion of western Syria near Euphrates, gathering tribute according to an annual custom, when the prince of Bectin came with the other chiefs to salute his majesty and to bring a gift. The other chiefs brought gold, and lapis lazuli, and turquoise, and valuable woods, but the prince of Bectin thought with his offerings in his oldest daughter, who was exceptionally stunning. The king accepted the maiden and took her to Egypt, where he made her the chief royal partner and gave her the name Ra-Neferu, i.e., the appeals of Ra, the sun god. A little time after, in the 15th year of the reign of the king of Egypt, the prince of Bectin appeared in Thebes on the 22nd day of the 2nd month of summer. And when he had been led into the presence, he laid his offering at the feet of the king and did tribute to him. As fast as he had the chance, he explained the item of his to see Egypt, and said that he had come on behalf of the young sister of Queen Ra-Neferu, who was grievously ill, and he begged the king to send out a physician to see his daughter, Bent Reshet, or Bent-Enth Reshet. Thereupon the king summoned into his presence all he learned of his court, and he called upon them to pick from among their number a proficient doctor, that he may go to Bectin and recover the queen's young sister. The royal scribe, Tehuti Embeb, was advised for this purpose, and the king at the same time set him off with the envoy from Bectin to that country. In due course he showed up there and found that the princess of Bectin was under the influence of some evil spirit, which was helpless either to exorcise or to contend with any way efficiently. When the king of Bectin saw that his daughter was in no way benefited by the Egyptian scribe, he dispatched his envoy a second time to Egypt with the petition that the king would send out a god to heal his daughter, and the envoy showed up in Thebes at the time when the king was celebrated the celebration of Amun. As quickly as the king had heard of what was wanted, he went into the temple of Khonsu, Nefer-Hetep, and said to the god, "O my fair lord, I have come once again into thy presence to entreat thee on behalf of the daughter of the prince of Bectin, and he entreated him to enable the god Khonsu to go to Bekton, and said, "Grant that thy magical or saving power might go with him, and let me send his magnificent majesty into Bekton to provide the daughter of the prince of that land from the power of the devil." The king of Egypt dispatched Khonsu to Bekton, where the god showed up after a journey of 17 months. As quickly as he'd been welcomed to the nation by the prince of Bekton and his generals and nobles, the god went to the palace where the princess was, and he realized that the Bent Reshet was possessed of a fiend. But as fast as he made use of his magical power, the devil left her, and she was recovered straight away. Then that satanic force spoke with Khonsu and acknowledged his power, and having tendered to him his unqualified submission, he offered to go back to his own place, but he begged Khonsu to ask the prince of Bekton to make a feast at which they could both be present, and he did so, and the god and the devil and the prince spent a very happy day together. When the feast was concluded, the demon went back into his own land, which he loved, according to his promise. Then, as fast as the prince acknowledged the power of Khonsu, he planned to keep him in Bekton, and the god actually tarried there for 3 years, 4 months, and 5 days. But at length he departed from his shrine and returned to Egypt in the form of a hawk of gold. When the king saw what had happened, he spoke to the priest and announced to him his determination to send back to Egypt the chariot of Khonsu. And when he had loaded him with gifts and offerings to every kind, the Egyptians set out from Bekton and made the journey back to Thebes in security. On his return, Khonsu took all of the gifts which had been given to him by the prince of Bekton and brought them to the temple of Khonsu Neferhetep, where he laid them at the feet of the god. Such is the story which the priests of Khonsu under the new empire were wont to relate concerning their god, who could perform the mighty deeds and wonders and vanquish the satanic forces of darkness. This has been Egyptian Mythology, Gods and Goddesses of Ancient Egypt, written by Harper Van Stalen. Read for you by Chloe Jacobson. Copyright 2020 by Harper Van Stalen. Production copyright by Harper Van Stalen. Egyptian Mythology, Princes, Pyramids, and Myths Explained. Written by Harper Van Stalen. Read for you by Chloe Jacobson. Chapter 1. Egyptian Hieroglyphic Writing. Ancient Egyptian history covers a continuous period of over 3,000 years. To put this in perspective, most modern-day countries count their histories in centuries. Only modern China can come anywhere near this in terms of historical continuity. Egyptian culture declined and vanished almost 2,000 years ago. The last vestiges of the living civilization disappeared in AD 391, when the Byzantine Emperor Theodosius I closed all pagan temples throughout the Roman Empire. Hieroglyphs were called by the Egyptians the words of God. And in contrast to the easy elegance of modern-day writing systems, this early effort at taping words used some techniques to communicate meaning. The picture symbols represent a combination of alphabet and syllabic noises together with images that determine or clarify meaning and representations of actual items, which are the spoken word of the thing they represent. All writing systems most likely progressed in this way, but their original forms were lost as pictures were refined to a basic abstraction, making writing an efficient tool for everyday company. Indeed, the old Egyptian heretic script served this function, but the Egyptians intentionally maintained hieroglyphs in their original forms simply because they believed them a gift from the gods, which possessed magic powers. So they inscribed them on their temple walls, tombs, objects, jewelry, and magical papyri to impart transcendent power not for ordinary daily communication. It was not until Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in 1798 that the fantastic artifacts of the Egyptians were seen in Europe, and their age-old society began to awaken from its long sleep. In 1799, a French captain called Pierre Bouchard found the Rosetta Stone, which was sculpted with the exact same text in 2 languages, Egyptian and Greek, and 3 writing systems, hieroglyphic, demotic, and the Greek alphabet. This was a tremendous piece of luck because it made it possible for scholars to open the hieroglyphic code. And without the stone, we would know nothing of the age-old Egyptians. And the details of their 3,000 years of history would remain a secret. The man who did more than any other to recuperate the words of the age-old Egyptians was Jean-François Champollion. He was a historian and fantastic linguist, and by the age of 16 had mastered not only Latin and Greek, but 6 old Asian languages, including but not limited to Coptic, which was the late form of Old Egyptian. Champollion had a distinct advantage over others in the job of breaking the hieroglyphic code. Because he understood Coptic, he was able to translate the meanings of the age-old Egyptian words. In the 1820s, Champollion developed an entire list of Egyptian signs with their Greek equivalents and was the first Egyptologist to recognize that the symbols were not only alphabetic, but also syllabic, and in many cases, determinative, meaning that they portrayed the meaning of the word itself. Egyptian hieroglyphic writing. Hieroglyphic signs are pleasing to the eye. Everyone wants to see their name in hieroglyphs. But comprehending the ancient script is hard, and unless you're interested in the finer points of Egyptian religion, make laborious reading. The contents of heretic papyri are even more remarkable. However, gaining some understanding of the hieroglyphic writing system can be fun and useful. With a bit of study, it is possible to quickly gain enough knowledge to identify the names of pharaohs. Helpful if you are planning a journey to Egypt. Chapter 2. Pyramids, Temples of Egypt. Here you will find info on the pyramids and temples of Egypt. That includes computer-generated reconstructions of what the pyramids and temples may have looked a lot like when they were first built. There are also many interactive ground plan maps, images, paintings, and illustrations from my visits to these ancient monoliths. There are a lot of improbable speculations about the pyramids, and also the Great Sphinx. Some individuals even really believe they were built by aliens from other worlds. All of the material proof, though, provides conclusively that they were made by the old Egyptians as gigantic burial structures. The temples were the landowners, the centers of administration, and the holders of all wealth. For 3,000 years, they preserved cultural continuity, promoted the authority of the rulers, and protected the social structure. Ultimately, they ended up being political powerhouses also, their high priests wielding as much, if not more power than the pharaoh himself. Forehead fell right into 2 primary types, cult temples and funerary or morgue temples. The cult temples housed images of the gods, while the mortuary temples were created as shrines to dead kings. Chapter 3. The Experiences of Sinu. In spite of all that he had done to unify Egypt and bring peace and success to her after years of civil war, Pharaoh Amenemhet went in constant danger from plots to murder him, hatched by one great lord or another who wished to take his throne. Fearing lest one of these plots should prove effective, and understanding that if one of his lords tried to usurp the throne, it would plunge Egypt into civil war again, Amenemhet promoted his child, Sen-Usert, whom the Greek historians called Sesostris, to be his viceroy and co-ruler, so that he ought to be all set to enter his palace as pharaoh instantly it ended up being vacant, and have the ability to put down any rising or rebellion that might break out. Amenemhet's knowledge was proved 10 years later when he was in fact murdered as the outcome of a conspiracy in the palace. Sen-Usert was abroad at the time, leading many army against Temeh in Libya. He had defeated the nemesis and was going back to Egypt with much booty and many hostages when messengers showed up by night, undoubtedly bearing essential news for the prince. Amongst Senusert's chosen bodyguard of royal companions was a young warrior called Sinu, who knew rather more than he ought to know about the plot against Amen and Het. When he saw the messengers, Sinu thought they must have tidings of what happened at Thebes. And he crept quietly up to the back of the royal pavilion and stood there as though on guard. However, with his dagger, he made a slit in the material where it stretched over one of the posts, so that he could hear everything that was said inside. Sinu heard the messengers telling Senusert of his father's death, and that he was now pharaoh. "You should ride for Thebes at the same time," they said. "Do not tell the army what has happened, but set out immediately with only the royal companions. Other messengers have gone to your faithful governors throughout Egypt, commanding them to hide the news of the death of Pharaoh Amen and Het from the people, till Pharaoh Senusert, life, health, strength be to him, is proclaimed in Thebes." When Sinu heard all this, he was filled with fear. If he went to Memphis with Senusert and the royal companions, his part in the plot to murder Amen-Het may have been discovered. And if he asked to remain with the army, he may be suspected, and Senusert would certainly understand that he had been spying and overheard the secret news. Perhaps none of these things would have happened, but Sinu was seized with such panic that he slipped quietly out of camp to wait till he saw which way the army was marching. Then he sneaked down and made his way south along the edge of the desert, attempting to keep away from all towns and even cities. When he came to where the Nile begins to branch off into the many streams of the delta, he was in more threat of being seen. One man whom he met suddenly turned and left, thinking that he was an outlaw, and he came at night to distract violence in high reeds, which should have been someplace near where the contemporary city of Cairo now stands. Here he found an old boat with oars or a rudder, and as the wind was blowing from west, he trusted himself to it and wandered downstream to Heliopolis, but came to the eastern bank of the Nile, a mile or so outside the town. So he continued on his way, crossing the Isthmus of Suez near the Bitter Lakes, and taking by night across the frontier and into the desert of Sinai. Here he almost passed away of thirst, and indeed had given up all hope and lain down never to rise again, when he heard the lowing of cattle. So weak was he. Sinu came to a camp of Astaic wanderers. The peasant of the tribe recognized him as an Egyptian, and guessed by his appearance that he was a man of significance. So he tended him carefully, feeding him gradually with the milk and water till he was strong enough to take more solid food. After this, Sinu came without further experiences to the ancient city of Byblos in Syria, where Egyptians had always been welcome since the great temple had been built on the area where Isis found the body of Osiris in the column of King Malkander's palace. He stayed here for a bit of time and then traveled more east to the great valley beyond the Lebanon variety, where King Ami-Enshi ruled the land, which was then called Retenu. Ami-Enshi invited him, saying, "Come and stay in my country. I have other men of Egypt who serve me, and you'll, at the very least, hear your native language in this place. Additionally, it appears to me that you must have been a man of some significance in Egypt. Because of this, tell me, why have you left your home? What news is there from the court of Pharaoh?" Then Sinu said, "Pharaoh Amen-Emhet has departed to dwell past the horizon. He has been used up to the palace of the gods. And I left, fearing civil war in Egypt and danger to those who had been near to Pharaoh. I left Egypt for no other reason but the following. I was loyal to Pharaoh, and no evil was spoken against me. Yet I believed that some god must have guided me and led me hither. I have had news from Egypt since you had left it," said Ami-Enshi. "The new Pharaoh is Senusert, the son of Amen-Emhet. He has taken his place upon the throne of the two lands. He has set the double crown of the upper and lower Egypt on his head. His hands hold the scourge and the scoundrel. There has been no rebellion yet in Egypt, but do you think war will come?" Sinu realized that Ame-Enshi was asking his advice as to whether it was safe to rebel against the rule of Egypt and try to make Ren-Entu an independent country outside of the Egyptian empire. And he said, "If Senusert is now pharaoh, and all in Egypt are faithful to him, there will be no threat of rebellion or civil war. For Senusert is a god on earth, a basic without an equivalent. It was he who led the army against the Libyans of Temeh and suppressed them successfully. He is a pharaoh who will extend the frontiers of Egypt's empire. He will send his army south into Nubia and east into Asia. Because of that, my advice to you is that you send messengers to kiss the ground before him. Let him know of your commitment, for he won't fail to do good to all lands that are true to him." The king Ame-Enshi responded, "How happy must Egypt be under so strong and great a pharaoh! I'm going to do even as you advise, but as for you, stay here with me and command my armies, and I will make you great." So Sinu flourished in the land of Rinnetu. He wed the eldest daughter of the king and was given a palace to dwell in, on an estate where all good things grew in abundance. There were groves of fig trees and vineyards where grapes grew so heavily that white wine was more numerous than water. There were rich fields of barley and wheat, and pastures where the cattle grew fat. Never did Sinu know of any lack of roast meats, either beef or chickens from his lands, or the wild things which he hunted with his hounds on the lower slopes of Mount Lebanon. Sinu didn't gain all this for absolutely nothing. As commander of Ame-Enshi's army, he made war on surrounding people and peoples who tried to get into Rinnetu from the north and the east. And in each venture, he achieved success, slaying the opponent with his strong arm and unnerving arrows, carrying off the residents as servants and restoring great droves of livestock to swell the royal herds. So, King Ame-Enshi grew to really love him as though he were his son, and prepared to make him next in succession to the throne by right of his marriage partner, the Princess Royal. For it seems that either the king of Rinnetu had no sons, otherwise the throne descended into the female line. Not all the people of Rinnetu were pleased at the idea of being ruled in days to come by an immigrant. And there was a murmur of rebellion headed by a particular champ, who was the strongest man and most popular warrior in the nation, and against whom nobody had the ability to stand and fight. When King Ame-Enshi heard of this, he was bothered at heart and sent out for Sinu, saying to him, "Do you know this man? Have you any secret that he has found?" And Sinu answered, "My lord, I have never seen him. I have never entered his house. He comes against me out of envy, and if it pleases you, I'll meet him in a fight. For either he is a braggart who wants to make both my property and my power, otherwise he is like a wild bull who wants to gore the tame bull and add his cows to his own herd. Or he's simply like a bull that can bear no other bull to be thought more powerful or fiercer than he is himself." So the battle was set up. It was to happen before a great event of the people of Rinnetu, in the presence of the king himself. All night, Sinu practiced with his weapons, checking his bow and sharpening his javelins. At daybreak, he came to the field of battle, and the people applauded him, weeping. Can there be any fighting man greater than Sinu? But when the champion came stepping out from amongst his followers, they fell quiet, for he was a magnificent man certainly. He began the fight, shooting at Sinu with his arrows and hurling his javelins. However, Sinu was pretty fast on foot and quick of eye, and he evaded them all or turned them harmlessly away with his guard. Then he made prepared for the champ, who came hurrying on him, waving a mighty battle-axe above his head. Sinu shot an arrow, and the champ turned it with his shield. Then Sinu tossed a javelin so swiftly that the champion had no time to ward it off, but was struck in the neck by it, stumbled, and fell upon his face. The battle-axe flew out of his hand. Sinu took hold of it and smote off his competitor's head with a single blow. All the people of Rinnetu cheered him, and the king caught him in his arms and embraced him, sobbing, Definitely, here is the worthiest man in all of the land to rule with me." So, Sinu ended up being the greatest lord in Renitu after Ami and Shi, and ruled the land with him for several years, and became king after him when he died. But when he aged, Sinu started to long for his own land, and a great desire encountered him to see Egypt once more before he passed away to be laid to rest at the last rock tomb at Thebes. Pharaoh Sen-Usert knew that the king of Renitu was that Sinu who had been his royal companion in the days of Amen-Emhet. He had corresponded to him as a devoted subject, and Sinu had replied as a faithful subject should. Now he wrote begging to be forgiven for leaving the royal service at the time of unpredictability after Amen-Emhet's death, and asking if he might go back to Egypt to spend his old age there. Sen-Usert wrote back at once, bidding him come stay in the royal palace as a great lord and trusted adviser, and ended, "Return to Egypt to look again on the land where you were born, and the palace where you served me so faithfully in the days before Osiris required to himself my father, the good god Amen-Emhet. You are now aging. You are no longer a young man bent on adventures. Anticipate the day of your burial. Don't let death encounter you far among the Asiatics. Dwell with me in the mummy case of wealthy gold with your face inlaid upon with lapis lazuli. A sledge drawn by my oxen will bring you to your tomb while the singers enter front and the dancers follow behind you till you come to the door of your sepulchre. That will be produced for you in the midst of the royal burial palaces where princes and viziers lie, and the walls shall be painted with all of the wisdom of the dead, so that your soul will surely pass into the Duat. And rich treasures and numerous offings shall be embedded in your burial place, so that your Ka could feast upon them until the day comes when Osiris will go back to the earth. Come quickly, for you grow old, and you know not when some disease may smite you down. It is wrong that a noble of Egypt must be laid in the earth covered in a sheepskin like an Asiatic. Come rapidly, for you have strolled too long." Sinu rejoiced extremely when he got this letter. At once he made arrangements to turn over the rule of Renitu with all his possessions to his oldest son, and then he set out for Egypt, participated by a small party of his chosen followers. When he reached the borders of Egypt, he was met by an embassy from Pharaoh, who invited him warmly and made much of the lords of Renitu who had come with him. At the Nile was a ship waiting on him, and Sinu was brought up the river in a great state and convenience to the palace of Pharaoh. When he was led into the royal presence, he prostrated himself on the ground before the throne and lay as though dead. Then Pharaoh Sen-Usert said kindly, "Raise him up and let him speak. Sinu, you have reached your home. You have ceased to wander in foreign lands and return in respectable old age, so that when the time comes, you might be laid to rest in a fine burial place at western Thebes, and not thrust into the ground by Asiatic barbarians. See, I welcome you by name. Welcome, Sinu." Then Sinu rose and stood before Sen-Usert with downcast eyes and said, "Behold, I stand before you, and my life is yours to do with as you will." Pharaoh stepped down from his throne and took Sinu by the hand. He led him to the queen and said to her laughingly, "See, here is Sinu dressed like a wild Asiatic of the desert." Then the royal children came to welcome him also. And Pharaoh uttered his decree, saying, "I make Sinu a companion of Pharaoh, a great lord of the court. I give him such lands and riches as becomes such a one, those that he fortified when he left from Egypt long ago, and more than he lost, to invite him on his return and demonstrate how happy we are to have him with us once more." And so Sinu became a great man in Egypt and a buddy of the Pharaoh from whom he had left in a minute of panic. He gave lavish care to the sculpting and decorating of his burial place, and triggered all of the story of his adventures to be written on it, and also he copied out and kept in the archives. And when he died, he was laid to rest with all honor. His burial place has not been found, but the account of his experiences has boiled down to us, for it was a favorite tale in ancient Egypt and was written lots of times on papyrus, and read for hundreds of years after his death. Chapter 4. The Land of the Dead. The one visit to the Duat of which a record remains was paid by C. Osiris, the terrific child magician who read the sealed letter, and his father, Setna, the son of Pharaoh Ramses the Great. They stood one day in the window of the palace at Thebes, watching 2 funerals on their way to the west. The first was that of a wealthy man. His mummy was confined in a wood case inlaid with gold. Troops of servants and mourners brought him to burial and bore gifts for the tomb, while many priests walked in front and behind, shouting hymns to the gods and reciting the great names and words of power which he would really need on his journey through the Duat. The second funeral service was that of a poor worker. His 2 sons carried the easy wooden case. His widow and daughters-in-law were the only mourners. "Well," said Setna, watching the 2 funeral services going down to where the boats were waiting to carry them across the Nile, "I hope that my fate will be that of the wealthy worthy, and not that of the poor laborer." "On the contrary," said Osiris, "I pray that the poor man's fate could be yours, and not that of the rich man." Setna was much hurt by his son's words, but Osiris tried to explain them, saying, "Whatever you may have seen here matters little compared to what chanced to these 2 in the judgment hall of Osiris. I will prove it to you, if you'll trust yourself to me. I know the words of power that will open all gates. I can release your Ba, and mine are souls that can then fly to the Duat and see all that is happening there. Then you're going to find how different the fates are of this rich man who has worked evil throughout his life, and this pauper who has done anything but good." Setna found out to really believe anything the terrific child said without surprise, and now he consented to accompany his child to the Duat, although he knew that such an expedition would be unsafe, for once they were there, they may not be able to return. So the prince and the little boy made their way to the sanctuary of the temple of Osiris, where, as members of the royal family, they had the power to go. When Setna had barred the doors, Osiris drew a magic circle around them and around the statue of Osiris and round the altar on which the little fire of cedar wood was burning. Then he threw a certain powder into the flame upon the altar. Thrice he threw the powder, and as he threw it, a ball of fire rose from the altar and floated away. Then he spoke a spell. It ended with a great name of power, a word at which the whole temple rocked, and the flame of the altar jumped high and then sank into darkness. But the temple of Osiris wasn't dark. Setna turned to see whence the light came, and would have cried out in horror if the silence had not pushed him on like a weight that held him paralyzed. For standing on either side of the altar he saw himself as a child, and Osiris only all of a sudden knew that he wasn't in his own body. And the boys, for the 2 bodies lay in the shadows cast by these 2 forms, the forms of their Kas or doubles, and above each Ka hovered a tongue of flame which was its Ku or spirit, and the clear light of the Ku served to show its Ka, and the dim form of the body from which Ka and Ku were drawn. Then the silence was broken by a whisper soft as a feather falling, yet which seemed to fill the whole temple with sound. "Follow me now, my dad," said the voice of Osiris, "for the time is brief, and we should be back before morning if we would live to see the sun of Re rise again over Egypt." Setna turned and saw beside him the Ba, or soul of Osiris, a great bird with golden feathers, but with the head of his son. "I follow," he forced his lips to answer. Then, as the whisper filled the temple, he rose on the golden wings of his own Ba and followed the Ba of Osiris. The temple roofing system seemed to open to let them through, and a moment later they were speeding into the west swifter than an arrow from Ethiopian's bow. Darkness lay over Egypt, but one red gash of sundown shone through the great pass in the mountains of the western desert, the space of Abydos. Through this they sped into the first region of night and saw, below, the musketet boat in which Ray began his journey into the Duat, with the ending of each day. Superb was the boat, wonderful in its trappings, and its colors were of amethyst and emerald, jasper and turquoise, lazuli and the deep glow of gold. A business of the gods drew the boat along the ghostly river of death with golden towing ropes. The portals of the Duat were flung wide, and they got in the first area between the 6 snakes, who were curled on either side. And in the great boat of Ray journeyed the cause of all the ones who had died that day and were on their way to the judgment hall of Osiris. So the boat carried on its way through regions of night and thick darkness and came to the portal of the second region. Tall were the walls on either side, and upon their tops were the points of spears, so that none may climb up over. The great wood doors turned on pivots, and once again, snakes, breathing fire and poison, secured them. However, all who traveled through the boat of Ray spoke the words of power decreed for that website, and the doors swung open. The second area was the kingdom of Ray, and the gods and heroes of old who had resided on earth when the king was dwelt there in peace and happiness, guarded by spirits of the corn, who make the wheat and barley thrive because the fruits of the earth to increase. Yet not one of the dead who voyaged into the boat of Ray may pause there or set foot on the land, for they should pass into Amenti, the third region of the Duat, where the judgment hall of Osiris stood waiting to receive them. So the boat came to the next sights, and at the word of power the great wooden doors yelled open on their pivots, yet not so loudly did they yell as the man who lay with one of the pivots turning in his eye as punishment for the evil he had done on earth. Into the third region sailed the boat of Ray, and here the dead disembarked in the outer court of the judgment hall of Osiris. However, the boat itself continued its way through the other 9 regions of the night, until the rebirth of Ray from out of the mouth of the dragon of the east brought down again on the earth, and the rising of the sun. Yet the sun would not rise unless each night Ray battled and defeated the dragon Apep, who seeks ever to devour him in the 10th area of the night. The Ba of Setna and see Osiris did not follow the boat of Ray further, but flew over the cause of the newly dead, who came on one by one to the portal hall of Osiris, and one by one were challenged by the doorkeeper. "Stay," wept the doorkeeper, "I will not announce thee unless thou knowest my name." "Understander of my hearts is thy name," answered each advised Ka. "Searcher of bodies is thy name." "Then to whom should I announce thee?" asked the doorkeeper. "Thou shouldst tell me of my coming into the interpreter of the 2 lands." "Then who is the interpreter of the 2 lands?" "It is Thoth, the wise god." So each Ka traveled through the doorway into the hall. Thoth was waiting to receive them, saying, "Come with me. Yet why hast thou come?" "I have come here to be announced," answered the Ka. "What is thy condition?" "I'm pure of sin." "Then to whom shall I announce thee? Shall I reveal thee to him whose ceiling is of fire, whose walls are living serpents, whose pavement is water?" "Yes," replied the Ka, "announce me to him, for he is Osiris." So ibis-headed Thoth led the Ka to where Osiris sat upon his throne, wrapped in the mummy clothes of the dead, wearing the uraeus crown upon his forehead, and holding the scourge and the scoundrel crossed on his breast. Before him stood a huge balance with 2 scales, and jackal-headed Anubis, god of death, took a step forward to lead the Ka to the judgment. But before the weighing of the heart, each dead man's Ka spoke in his own defense, saying, "I am pure, I am pure, I am pure, I am pure. My pureness is that of the Bennu bird, the bright phoenix whose nest is on the stone Paris tree, the obelisk at Heliopolis. Witness me, I have come to you without sin, without guilt, without evil, without a witness against me, without one against whom I have acted. I live on truth and I eat of truth. I have done that which men said, that which gods are content. I have gratified each god with that which he desires. I have given bread to the hungry, water to the thirsty, clothing to the naked, and a boat to him who could not cross the river. I have provided offerings to the gods and offerings to the dead, So preserve me from Apep, the eater up of souls. So safeguard me, Lord Aphid Crown, Lord of Breath, great God Osiris. Then came the moment which the evildoer feared, but the good man invited with delight. Anubis took the heart out of the ka that was the double of his earthly body and placed it in the scale. And in the other scale was set the feather of truth. Heavy was the heart of the evildoer, and it dragged down the scale. Lower and lower it sank, while Thoth made the angle of the beam, till the scale sank so low that Ammit, the devourer of hearts, could catch the sinner's heart in his jaws and bear it away. Then the evildoer was driven forth into the thick darkness of the Duat to dwell with Apep in the horrible pits of fire. But with the good man the feather of truth sank down, and his heart rose up, and Thoth sobbed aloud to Osiris and the gods, "True and precise are the words of this man that he has spoken. He has not sinned. He has not done wicked towards us. Let not the eater up of souls have power over him. Grant that the everlasting bread of Osiris be given to him, and a location in the fields of peace with the followers of Horus." Then Horus took the dead man by the hand and led him before Osiris, saying, "I have come to thee, O Unifer Osiris, bringing with me this new Osiris, his heart held true at the appearing from the balance. He has not sinned against any god or goddess. Thoth has weighed his heart and found it true and righteous. Grant that there may be given to him the bread and beer of Osiris, could he be kind of like the followers of Horus." Then Osiris inclined his head, and the dead man passed, rejoicing into the fields of peace there to dwell, taking pleasure in all the important things he had loved best in life, in a rich land of plenty, till Osiris went back to earth, taking with him all the ones that had shown worthy to live forever as his subjects. All these things and more the Ba of sea Osiris showed to the Ba of his father Setna. And at length he said, "Now you know why I wished your fate to be that of the pauper and not of the rich man, for the rich man was he in whose eye the pivot of the third door was turning. But the poor man dwells forever in the fields of peace, outfitted in fine robes and owning all of the offerings which accompanied the evil rich man to his burial place." Then the two Ba spread their golden wings and flew back through the night to Thebes. There they re-entered their bodies, which their cause had been securing in the temple of Osiris, and were able to go back to their place as common, living father and child, in time to see the sun rise beyond the eastern desert and turn the cliffs of western Thebes to pink and purple and gold as a new day dawned over Egypt. Chapter 5. The Doomed Prince. There once was a king who ached in heart because no child had been born to him. He prayed the gods to grant his desire, and they decreed that as he prayed, so it must be. And his marriage partner produced a child. When the Hathors came to choose his fate, they said, "His death shall be by the crocodile, or by the snake, or by the pet dog." And the ones that stood round, upon hearing this, hurried to tell the king, who was much grieved, threat, and feared considerably. And just because of what he had heard, he triggered a house to be constructed in the mountains, and furnished richly, and with all that could be preferred, so the child should not go abroad. When the boy was grown, he went one day upon the roofing system, and from there he saw a pet dog following a guy on the road. Then he turned to his attendant and said, "What is that which follows the man coming along the roadway?" And he was told that it was a pet dog. And the kid simultaneously wished to possess a pet dog, and when the king was told of his desire, he might not deny him, lest his heart should be miserable. As time went on and the child became a guy, he grew restive, and being told of the decree of the Hathors, at the same time sent out a message to his dad, saying, "Come, why and wherefore am I kept a prisoner? Though I am fated to 3 evil fates, let me follow my desires. Let God fulfill his will." And after this, he was free and did as other men. He was given weapons, and his pet dog was enabled to follow him. And they took him to the east country and said to him, "Behold, thou art free to go wherever thou wilt. He set his face to the north, his pet dog following, and his whim dictated his course. Then he lived on all the optimal of the game of the desert. And after that he came to the chief of Nyarana. And this chief had but one child, a daughter. For her had been built a house with 70 windows and 70 cubits from the ground. And here the chief had commanded all of the sons of the chiefs of the nations of Kalu to be brought, and he said to them, He who climbs and reaches my daughter's windows shall win her for a marriage partner. And a bit of time after the prince came, and the people chief of the Nyarana took the youth to the home and treated him with the greatest honor and kindness. And as he engaged of their food, they asked him whence he had come. He answered them, saying, I originate from Egypt. I am the child of an officer of that land. My mom died, and my dad has taken another partner who, when she bore my dad other kids, grew to hate me. Because of this, I ran away as a fugitive from her presence. And they were sorry for him and embraced him. Then one day he asked the climbing youths what they did as they did there. And when they told him that they climbed the height that they might win the chief's daughter for wife, he decided to make the effort with them. So, for afar off, he saw the face of the chief's daughter looking forth from her window and turned toward them. He climbed up the dizzy height and reached her window. So glad was she that she embraced and kissed him. And thinking to make glad the heart of her dad, the messenger went to him, saying, One of the youths hath reached the daughter's window. The chief inquired which of the chief's sons had achieved this, and he was told that Sit was the fugitive from Egypt. At this, the chief of Nyarana was wroth and swore that his daughter wasn't for an Egyptian fugitive. Let him go back to whence he came, he wept. An attendant hurried to warn the youth, but the maiden held him fast and wouldn't let him go. She swore by the gods, saying, By the being of Ra Harataki, if he is taken from me, I'm going to neither eat nor drink. In that hour I shall die. And her father was told of her vow, and hearing it, he sent some to slay the youth while he should be in his house. But the daughter of the primary divined this, and said again, By the great Lord Ra, if he be killed, then I will die ere the set of sun. If I am parted from him, then I will live no longer. Again her words were taken to the chief. He triggered his daughter and the youth to be brought previously him, and initially the boy was scared, but the chief of Nyarana embraced him passionately, saying, Tell me who thou art, for thou art as a son to me. He addressed him, I originate from Egypt. I am the son of an officer of that land. My mother died, and my dad has taken another partner who, when she bore my dad kids, grew to dislike me. Because of that I have left as a fugitive from her presence. Then the chief gave him his daughter to partner. He gave him a home and slaves, and he gave him land and livestock and all manner of good gifts. The time passed. One day the youth told his wife of his fate, saying to her, I am doomed to 3 evil fates, to die by a crocodile, a snake, or a dog. And her heart was filled with great dread. She said to him, Then let one kill the pet dog which follows thee. But he told her that could not be, for he had brought it up from the time it was little. At last, the youth wanted to travel to the land of Egypt, and his wife, fearing for him, would not let him go alone, so one went with him. They came to a town, and the crocodile of the river was there. Now in that town was a great and magnificent man, and he bound the crocodile and wouldn't suffer it to get away. When it was bound to the magnificent man was at peace and walked abroad. When the sun rose, the man returned to his home, and this he did every day for 2 months. After this, as the days passed, and the youth sat at ease in his house, when the night came, he lay on the couch and fell asleep on him, and then his wife filled a bowl of milk and put it by his side. Out from a hole came a serpent, and it tried to bite the sleeping man, but his marriage partner sat beside him watching and unsleeping. And the servant, seeing the snake, gave it milk so that it drank and was intoxicated, and lay powerless on its back. Seeing this, with her dagger and spouse dispatched it. Upon this her spouse woke, and understanding all, was astonished. See, she said to him, thy God hath actually given one of thy dooms into thy hand. Certainly he shall also give thee the others. And after that the youth made sacrifices to his God and praised him always. One day after this, The youth walked abroad in his fields, his dog following him, and his pet dog chased after the wild game, and he followed after the pet dog, who plunged into the river. He also entered into the river, and then came out a crocodile, who took him to the place where the magnificent man lived. And as he carried the crocodile, said to the youth, "Behold, I am thy doom, following after thee." This has been Egyptian Mythology, Princes, Pyramids, and Myths Explained, written by Harper Van Stalen. Read for you by Chloe Jacobson. Copyright 2020 by Harper Van Stalen. Production copyright by Harper Van Stalen. Egyptian Mythology, Deities, Sphinxes, and Stories from Ancient Egypt. Written by Harper Van Stalen. Read for you by Chloe Jacobson. Chapter 1. Some of the most worshipped ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses. Ancient civilization in Egypt consists of many interesting facts, some of which still remain a mystery. And this great land along the banks of the Nile River has shown up in both modern day and old history. Around 3100 BC, after the political unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, the pharaoh was the highest leader when it pertained to rituals and faith. Egyptian divine beings were considered to represent elements of nature. The people revered them and did not want to anger them. So what forms did these divine beings take? Let's take a look on top 10 most worshipped gods of ancient Egypt. 1. Amun-Ra, the Hidden One. As Zeus was to the Greeks, the Egyptian god Amun-Ra, or Amun, was considered the king of the gods and goddesses. He became Amun-Ra after being amalgamated with the sun god Ra. He was thought to be the dad of the pharaohs, and his female counterpart, Amunet, was called the female hidden one. Forming the Theban triad, Amun and Mut, in addition to their child, Khonsu, the moon god, were worshipped throughout ancient Egypt. Amun was not only worshipped in Egypt, but outside Egypt too. 2. Mut, the mother goddess. Mut means mom in Egyptian, and Mut is a primal divine being who wears 2 crowns on her head, each representing Upper and Lower Egypt. Also titled She Who Delivers, but was herself not born of any, Mut is represented as a vulture in hieroglyphs. She is otherwise integrated with other divine beings and is usually depicted as a feline, cobra, cow, and even lioness. The female parent of Khonsu, Mut, and her different associations was worshipped by numerous pharaohs. 3. Osiris, the king of the living. Considered the oldest kid of the earth god Zeb and the sky goddess Nut, Osiris was worshipped as the god of the afterlife, as the ancient Egyptians believed there was life after death. Usually represented with green skin, Osiris was the god of greenery, which indicated renewal and development, and was thought to be responsible for the fertile flooding and vegetation around the banks of the Nile. Osiris married his own sister Isis and was murdered by his brother Seth. In spite of being murdered by his own brother, Osiris was recharged by the magic of Isis to conceive a child. Horus is the child of Osiris and Isis, who avenged his father's death and occurred as a new pharaoh of Egypt while Osiris became the god of the underworld and helped in the afterlife of the pharaohs and the people. 4. Anubis, the magnificent embalmer. Before Osiris took control of, Anubis patrolled the underworld. Anubis was a psychopomph, or divine being who helps in the afterlife, and was the offspring of Ra and Nephesis. He was well known for mummifying the dead and directing their souls toward the afterlife. His skin was black, signifying the dark Nile deposits which made the land so fertile. With the head of a jackal and the body of a man, Anubis also represented renaissance and the staining of dead bodies after the embalming process. Ra, god of the sun and glow. The midday sun, Ra or Re, is one of the greatest importance in Egyptian history. The god of the sun, Ra, has a sun disk around his head and is really believed to have created this world. Every daybreak and sundown were seen as a procedure of renewal. Represented as a falcon-headed god, he and Horus shared an association which led him to be known as Horus of the Horizon. Most age-old Egyptian gods were merged with Ra, and many were created by him, such as competing gods like Ta, Isis, and Apep. 6. Horus, god of vengeance. Horus had a unique position in age-old Egypt. The kid of Osiris and Isis, he avenged his father's death and ruled Egypt. According to myth, he is also considered the child of Zeb and Nut, and this falcon-headed god with a crown of red and white was worshipped as the god of sky, war, security, and light. The Eye of Horus, or Wedjet Eye, was personified as the goddess Wadjet and was popularly referred to as Eye of the Ra. It symbolized that everything was being watched from above. 7. Thoth, god of knowledge and wisdom. An arbitrator who settled the disagreements between good and evil, Thoth is considered as a self-created god, master of both physical and magnificent laws, in addition to his equivalent Ma'at. He attained our universe by his proficiency of calculations. The age-old Egyptians acknowledged him as an author of science, philosophy, and magic. That ibis or baboon-headed divine being was considered to be the most learned god in ancient history. Also, considered the moon god for keeping count of time even when the sun wasn't there. Thoth is acknowledged as the someone who created the 365-day calendar. 8. Hathor, goddess of motherhood. Sometimes called the mistress of the West, Hathor welcomed the dead into the next life. Born of Ra, she exhibited motherhood and feminine love. The age-old Egyptians offered prayer to her as the goddess of music and dance. She is actually believed to provide a blessing as the assistant of women at the time of pregnancy and giving birth. Caring, humble, and kind to both the dead and the living, she was also called the Lady of Paradise, Earth, and the Underworld. 9. Sekhmet, goddess of war and healing. Leading and safeguarding the pharaohs during war, Sekhmet, the daughter of Ra, is illustrated as a lioness and is well known for her intense character. She is also known as the Powerful One and is very capable of ruining the enemies of her allies. She is portrayed with a solar disk and Uraeus, an Egyptian cobra, which was connected with royalty and the divine. Sekhmet helped the goddess Ma'at in the judgment hall of Osiris, which also gained her the track record of arbitrator. 10. Geb, god of earth. Also referred to as the dad of snakes, Geb represented crops and healing. With a goose on his head, this bearded god was believed to have caused earthquakes whenever he laughed. He was the child of Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of wetness, and had an important role in the Book of the Dead as the somebody that weighs the heart of the dead in the judgment hall of Osiris. The ancient Egyptians actually believed that he maintained the spirits of the wicked. In ancient Egypt, gods and goddesses were the depiction of all the fundamental requirements required for sustaining life. Most cults developed and many associations were made because of the interconnection between these life requirements. In other words, anything that made life possible was represented by age-old Egyptian god or goddesses. Chapter 2. The Story of Re. In the beginning, before there was any land of Egypt, all was darkness. And there was absolutely nothing but a great waste of water called Nun. The power of Nun was such that there occurred out of the darkness a great shining egg. And this was Re. Now Re was all-powerful, and he could take many forms. His power and the secret of it lay in his hidden name. But if he spoke other names, that which he named came into existence. I am Khepra at the dawn, and Re at midday, and Atum at night, he said, And the sun rose and passed across the sky and set for the first time. Then he called Shu, and the first winds blew. He named Tefnut the spitter, and the first rain fell. Next he named Geb, and the earth started existing. He called the goddess Nut, and she was the sky bridged the earth with her feet on one horizon and her hands on the other. He named Happy. And the great river Nile flowed through Egypt and made it rewarding. After this, Re called all things that were upon the earth, and they grew. Last of all he called humanity, and there were males and females in the land of Egypt. Then Re handled and shaped of a guy and became the first pharaoh, ruling over the entire country for thousands and countless years, and giving such harvests that even afterwards, the Egyptians mentioned the good ideas which happened in the time of Re. However, being in the form of a guy, Re aged. In time, guys no longer feared him or followed his laws. They made fun of him, saying, "Look at Re. His bones are like silver, his flesh like gold, his hair like the color of lapis lazuli." Re was mad when he heard this, and he was more angry still at the evil deeds which men were doing in disobedience to his laws. So he called together the gods whom he had made, Shu and Tefnut and Geb and Nut. And he also summoned Nun. Soon the gods gathered about Re in his secret palace, and the goddesses also. But humanity knew absolutely nothing of what was going on, and continued to mock at Re and to break his rules. Then Re spoke with Nun before he put together gods. "Eldest of the gods, you who made me, and you gods whom I have made, consider mankind who came into being at a glance of my eye. See how men plot against me, hear what they say of me, tell me what I should do to them, for I won't damage humanity till I have heard what you advise." Then Nun said, "My child Re, the god greater than he who made him and mightier than those whom he has created, turn your magnificent eye on them and send out destruction upon them in the form of your daughter, the goddess Sekhmet." Re replied, "Even now fear is falling upon them, and they are escaping into the desert and hiding themselves in the mountains in horror at the sound of my voice. Send against them the glance of your eye in the form of Sekhmet," wept all the other gods and goddesses, bowing before Re till their foreheads touched the ground. So, at the terrible glance from the eye of Re, his daughter came into existence, the fiercest of all goddesses. Like a lion she rushed upon her victim, and her chief pleasure was in massacre, and her satisfaction was in blood. At the bidding of Re, she came into Upper and Lower Egypt to slay those who had scorned and disobeyed him. She killed them amongst the mountains which lie on either side of the Nile, and down next to the river, and in the burning deserts. All whom she saw multitude, rejoicing in slaughter and the taste of blood. Currently, Re kept an eye out over the land and saw what Sekhmet had done. Then he called to her, saying, "Come, my daughter, and tell me how you have followed my commands." Sekhmet replied with the terrible voice of a lioness as she tears her prey. "By the life of which you have given me, I have undoubtedly done vengeance on mankind, and my heart rejoices." Now for lots of nights the Nile ran red with blood, and Sekhmet's feet were red as she went hither and thither through all of the land of Egypt, slaying and slaying. Currently, Re looked out over the earth once again, and now his heart was stirred with pity for man, even though they had rebelled against him. However, none could stop the harsh goddess Sekhmet, not even Re himself. She must cease from slaying of her own accord, and Re saw that this could only come about through cunning. So he gave his command, "Bring before me swift messengers who will run on the earth as quietly as shadows, and with the speed of the storm winds." When these were brought, he said to them, "Go fast as you can up the Nile to where it streams increasingly over the rocks and amongst the islands of the first cataract. Go to the isle that is called Elephantine, and bring from it a great store of the red ochre, which is to be found there." The messengers sped on their way and returned with the blood-red ochre to Heliopolis, the city of Re, where stand the stoned obelisks with points of gold, that are a lot like fingers pointing to the sun. It was night when they came into the city, but all day the women of Heliopolis had been brewing beer as Ray bade them. He came to where the beer stood waiting in the 7,000 containers, and the gods came with him to see how by his knowledge he would save mankind. "Socialize the red ochre of the elephantine with the barley beer," said Ray, and it was done, so that the beer shone red in the moonlight like the blood of man. "Now take it to the place where Sekhmet proposes to kill men when the sun rises," said Ray. And while it was still night, the 7,000 containers of beer were taken and put over the fields, so that the ground was covered to the depth of 9 inches, 3 times the step of the palm of a man's hand, with the strong beer, whose other name is Sleep Maker. When day came, Sekhmet the Terrible came also, licking her lips at the thought of the men she would kill. She found the place flooded with no living creature in sight, but saw the beer which was the color of blood, and she thought it was blood indeed, the blood of those whom she had killed. Then she laughed with joy, and her laughter was like the holler of a lioness that is hungry for the kill. Thinking that it was indeed blood, she stooped and drank. Again and yet again she drank, chuckling with pleasure, and the strength of the beer mounted to her brain, and she could no longer slay. At last she came returning to where Ray was waiting. That day she had not killed even a single man. Then Ray said, "You come in peace, sweet one," and her name was changed to Hathor. And her nature was changed also to the sweet taste of love and strength of desire. And henceforth Hathor laid low men and women only with the great power of love. However, forever after, her priestess drank in her honor the beer of Heliopolis, colored with the red ochre of Elephantine, when they celebrated her celebration each new year. So humanity was conserved, and Ray continued to rule, old though he was. Though time was drawing near when he must leave the earth to reign forever in the heavens, letting the more youthful gods rule in his place. For dwelling in the form of a man, of a pharaoh of Egypt, Ray was losing his knowledge. Yet he continued to reign, and no one could take his power from him, because that power dwelt in his secret name which no one knew but himself. If only anyone could discover his name of power, Ray would no longer rule in the world, but only magic arts was this possible. Geb and Nut had kids. These were the more youthful gods whose day had come to rule, and their names were Osiris and Isis, Nephthys and Seth. Of these, Isis was the wisest. She was cleverer than 1,000,000 men. Her knowledge was more than that of 1,000,000 of the worthy dead. She knew all things in heaven and earth except only for the secret name of Ray, and that she now set herself to learn by guile. Now Ray was aging every day. As he passed across the land of Egypt, his head shook from side to side with age. His jaw trembled, and he dribbled at the mouth, as do the older among men. As his spittle fell on the ground and made it mud, and this Isis took in her hands and kneaded together as if it had been dough. She molded it into the shape of a serpent, making the first cobra, which ever after was the symbol of royalty used by Pharaoh and his queen. Isis positioned the first cobra in the dust of the road by which Ray passed every day as he went through his 2 kingdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt. As Ray, gone by the cobra, bit him and then disappeared into the grass, but the venom of its bite coursed through his veins, and for a while Ray was speechless, save for one great cry of pain which rang across the earth from eastern to the western horizon. The gods who followed him crowded around, asking, "What is it? What ails you?" However, he could find no words. His lips shivered as he shivered in all his limbs, while the poison spread over his body as the Nile spreads over Egypt in the inundation. When at last he could speak, Ray said, "Help me, you whom I have made. Something has hurt me, and I do not know what it is. I created all things, yet this thing I did not make. It is a discomfort such that I have never understood before, and no other pain is equal to it. Yet who can hurt me? For none knows my secret name which is hidden in my heart, giving me all power and safeguarding me against the magic of both wizard and witch. However, as I went through the world which I have created, through the 2 lands that are in my special care, something stung me. It is like fire, yet it isn't fire. It is a lot like water and not water. I burn and I shiver, while all my limbs shiver. So call before me all of the deities who have ability in healing and knowledge of magic, and wisdom that reaches to the heavens." Then all the gods came to Re, weeping and regretting at the horrible thing which had befallen him. With them came Isis, the therapist, the queen of magic, who breathes the breath of life and knows words to restore those who are dying. And she said, "What is it, Divine Father? Has a snake bitten you? Has an animal of your own creating raised its head against you? I'm going to drive it out by the magic that is mine and make it shiver and fall down before your glory." "I passed the normal way through my 2 lands of Egypt," replied Re, "for I wished to look upon all that I had made. As I went, I was bitten by a snake which I didn't see, a snake that I had not created. Now I burn as if with fire, and shiver as if my veins were filled with water, and sweat runs down my admit. It runs in the faces of men on the hottest days of summertime." "Tell me your secret name," said Isis in a sweet, soothing voice. "Tell me, Divine Father, for only by speaking your name in my spells can I treat you." Then Re spoke the many names that were his. "I am maker paradise and earth," he said. "I am contractor of the mountains. I am source of the waters throughout all of the world. I am light and darkness. I am creator of the great river of Egypt. I'm the kindler of the fire that burns in the sky. Yes, I'm Kephara in the early morning, Re at the noontide, and Tum at night." But Isis never said ever a word, and the poison had its way in the veins of Re, for she knew that he had told her only the names which all guys knew, and that his secret name, the name of power, still lay hidden in his heart. At last she said, "You know well that the name which I need to learn isn't among those which you have spoken. Come, tell me the secret name, for if you do, the toxin will emerge, and you are going to have an end of pain." The toxin burned with a great burning, more effective than any flame of fire, and Re wept out at last. "Let the name of power pass from my heart into the heart of Isis, but before it does, swear to me that you'll tell it to no other, to save only the son whom you have, the son whose name will be Horus. And bind him initially with such an oath that the name will stay with him and be handed down to no other gods or man." Isis, the magnificent magician, swore the oath, and the rumor of the name of power passed from the heart of Re into hers. Then she said, "By the name which I know, let the poison go from Re forever." So it passed from him, and he had peace. However, he ruled upon the earth no longer. Instead, he took his place in the high paradises, taking a trip every day across the sky in the similarity of the sun itself, and by night crossing into the underworld of Amenti in the boat of Re, and passing through the 12 departments of the Duat, where many dangers prowl. Yet Re passes securely, and with him he takes those living souls of the dead who know all the charms and prayers and words that must be said. And so, that a man may not go unprepared for his voyage in the boat of Re, the Egyptians painted all the scenes of that journey on the walls of the burial places of the pharaohs, with all the knowledge that was written in the book of the dead, of which a copy was buried in the grave of lower men, so that they might too read and come securely to the land beyond the west where the dead dwell. Chapter 3. See Osiris and the Sealed Letter. Many tales were told in ancient Egypt of Setna, the child of Ramses the Great, who was the best of all scribes, and who found and read the Book of Thoth. And tales were also told of his son, See Osiris, the gift of Osiris, the wonderful child who, at the age of 12, was the greatest magician Egypt had ever known. His most famous exploit began on a day when Ramses sat in the great hall of his palace at Thebes, with his princes and nobles about him. And the Grand Vizier came busy in with a look of surprise on his face, and prostrated himself before Ramses, sobbing, "Life, health, strength be with you. O Pharaoh, there has come to your court a rascally Ethiopian 7 feet tall, who demands speech with you." saying that he is here to prove the magic of Egypt is absolutely nothing compared to the magic of Ethiopia. You are going to be a jest on the lips of all men." "Bid him enter," commanded Pharaoh, and currently a big Ethiopian stepped into his presence, acquiesced to the ground, and said, "King of Egypt, I have brought here in my hand a sealed letter to see if any of your priests or scribes or magicians can read what's written in it without breaking the seal. And if none can read it, I'm going to return to Ethiopia and tell my king and all his people how weak is the magic of the Egyptians, and you are going to be a jest on the lips of all men." Pharaoh was both upset and troubled when he heard this, and he sent out in a rush for his smart son, Setna, and told him what had chanced. Setna was also upset, but he said, "O Pharaoh, my dad, life, health, strength be to you. Quote this barbarian, go and take his rest. Let him eat, drink, and sleep in the royal guest house until your court is put together next, when I'll bring a magician who will show that we who practice the magic art in Egypt are a match for anybody from the lands past Cush." "Be it so," replied Pharaoh, and the Ethiopian was led away to the congenial home entertainment of the royal guest house. But though he had spoken with so confidence, Setna was troubled. Although he had read the Book of Thoth and was the wisest man in Egypt and the most skilled magician, he could not read a letter that was written on papyrus scroll that was rolled up and sealed without breaking the seal and unrolling the letter. When he returned to his palace, he lay down on his couch to think, and he looked so pale and bothered that his marriage partner came to him and was afraid that he was ill. With her came their child, Osiris, and when Setna had told all his troubles, the woman burst into tears, but the boy began to laugh happily. "My son," said Setna with a puzzled appearance, "why do you laugh when I tell you of that of which has caused me so much concern to Pharaoh and such sadness to me, your dad?" "I laugh," answered Osiris, "because your trouble is no trouble at all, but a present of the gods to bring great splendor to Egypt and humble the prideful, self-important king of Ethiopia and his wizards. Stop from sadness. I'm going to read the sealed letter." Setna emerged and looked searchingly at the little boy who stood with such confidence before him. "You have great magic powers, I know, my son," he said. "But how can I be certain that we stand before Pharaoh? You can certainly read that which is written on a sealed scroll of papyrus." "Go to your room where your writings are kept," replied Osiris. "Choose any papyrus that you like, seal it if it isn't sealed already, and I'm going to read it to you without even taking it out of your hand." Setna emerged and got a papyrus from his study, and Osiris read what was written on it while his father held it, still rolled and sealed with wax. Next day, Pharaoh Ramses summoned his court once again. When all were assembled, he bade the Grand Vizier bring the Ethiopian before him with his sealed letter. Happily, the huge wizard strode into the hall with hardly a nod to the best of all the pharaohs. He held up the roll of papyrus and sobbed, "King of Egypt, let your magicians read what is written on this sealed letter. Otherwise, admit that the magic of Ethiopia is better than the magic of Egypt." "Setna, my son," said Pharaoh, "you are the greatest magician in Egypt. Be pleased to address this insolent barbarian who, if he were not a messenger, I would have beaten with rods." "O Pharaoh, life, health, strength be to you," answered Setna. "Such a pet dog as this, who has no respect for the good god Pharaoh Ramses, isn't worth to be pitted against a magician full of years of knowledge. However, my son, Osiris, who at the age of 12 is already proficient enough in the secret tradition to stand against him, shall read his letter." There was a murmur throughout the court and a little ripple of laughter as the little boy moved forward on one side of Pharaoh's throne and boiled down to the massive Ethiopian who stood grimacing at the foot of the dolls with the sealed letter held up in his right hand. "O Pharaoh, my grandfather, life, health, strength be to you," said Osiris in a clear voice that all could hear. The sealed roll in this wizard hand tells the tale of an insult wrought upon one that held the scourge and the scoundrel, someone who wore the double crown, a pharaoh of Egypt who sat where you sit 500 years ago. It tells of a king who ruled as today's king's guidelines over the Ethiopians. He sat one day in his marble summer house next to the river Nile, far away to the south. Between the pillars behind him was a trellis of ebony, and it was grown so thickly with sweet-smelling climbers that it seemed like a thick hedge. In the shade between its greatest magicians sat talking together, and the king, listening idly to their words, heard the first say, "In arms, we might not have the ability to stand against Egypt, but in magic, we are certainly the masters of Pharaoh, our overlord, and all his people. Why, even I could bring a great darkness over all of the land of Egypt that would last for 3 days." "True," said another magician. "I, for example, could bring blight upon Egypt that would ruin its crops for 1 season." So they went on, each telling the plague disease that he could bring on Egypt, till at last the chief magicians of Ethiopia said, "As for this pet dog of Pharaoh who calls himself our overlord, I could bring him here by magic and cause him to be beaten with 500 strokes of the rod before all the people. Yes, I could do this and carry him back to his palace in Egypt, all in the space of 5 hours." When the king heard this, he summoned the magicians before him and said to the chief of them, "Son of Tansit, I have heard your words. If you do the Pharaoh of Egypt even as you have said, I'm going to give you a greater benefit than any magician has ever received." The child of Tansit bowed before him and at once gone about his spells. He fashioned a litter of 4 bearers in wax. He chanted words of power over them, and he breathed the breath of life into them. And he bade them hasten to Egypt and bring Pharaoh to Ethiopia at the time of the dark hours of the night. When he had read so far in the sealed letter, Osiris turned to the Ethiopian and said, "These words that I have read, they are not written in the sealed roll that you keep in your hands? Answer really, or might Amun-Ra blast you where you stand." The Ethiopian bowed before Osiris and gasped, "These words are undoubtedly written there, my lord." So, Osiris, ongoing reading from the sealed letter. All happened as the child of Tansit has promised. Pharaoh was raised from his royal bed at Thebes, brought to Ethiopia, beaten in public by the king's servants with 500 strokes, and reclaimed again in all the space of 5 hours. The next morning he woke in great pain, and the marks of the rods on his back told him that it had been no dream. So Pharaoh summoned his court and called his magicians before him and told them of the embarrassment that had been wrought. "I desire revenge upon the king of Ethiopia," he ended, "and revenge upon his magicians. Furthermore, I wish the land of Egypt and the magnificent person of her Pharaoh to be secured against these barbarians and their evil and insulting magic." Then Pharaoh's chief magician, the Khureb of Egypt, bowed low before him, sobbing, "O Pharaoh, life, health, strength be to you. It can't be that this wickedness of the sons of Set who dwell in Nubia and Ethiopia shall continue against your magnificent majesty. Tonight I will look for counsel of Thoth, the god of wisdom and magic, in his great temple, and tomorrow be sure I shall have beauty that will bring both vengeance and security." So Khureb overslept the temple that night, and Thoth, with the ibis head, came and dominated his bed and advised him in all that was to be done for the honor of Egypt and the security of the good god her Pharaoh. No Ethiopian litter-bearers had gone to the royal palace that night, but the night after they came again to carry Pharaoh into Ethiopia to be beaten before all of the barbarians. But the magic which Thoth, the smart, had taught to Khureb of Egypt was so strong that their magic was in vain. They could not stand but gibber in the royal bedchamber. They could not so much as raise their arms to raise Pharaoh onto the magic litter, and presently they vanished and were no more seen in Egypt. But the next morning, when Khureb heard of what chanced in Pharaoh's bedchamber, he rejoiced exceedingly, and straightway he approached preparing a magic litter of his own, with 4 bearers who, that night, carried the king of Ethiopia into the great square before the temple of Amun-Ra at Thebes, and had him beaten with 500 strokes of the rod before all the people there assembled. In the morning the king of Ethiopia woke in his palace, sore and troubled. Simultaneously he sent out for the child of Tansit, and bade him to find a magic to safeguard him against the magicians of Egypt and bring revenge upon Pharaoh. But the son of Tansit could do nothing. 3 times was the king of Ethiopia carried into Thebes and beaten before all the people. Then he humbled himself before the magnificence of the good god Pharaoh and was beaten no more. However, he caused the son of Tansit to be cast out of his palace with many curses, saying, "In life and in death might you wander the earth till you have bring vengeance upon Egypt, on her Pharaoh and upon her magicians, and until you prove that there is a magic greater than the magic of the magicians of Chem." Then Osiris pointed to the sealed letter, saying, "Ethiopian, these words which I have read, they are not written in the roll of papyrus which you hold, still sealed in your hands? Answer truly, or may Amun-Ra blast you where you stand." The Ethiopian fell on his knees and sobbed, "These words are undoubtedly written there, mighty magician." Then the seal was broken, and the letter was read aloud before Pharaoh and all his court. And the words of the letter were the words Osiris, the wonderful child, had read. Only that in reading, he had paid due honor to Pharaoh, and had mentioned the barbarians of Ethiopia in such terms as were proper. After this, the Ethiopian said humbly, "Mighty Pharaoh, Lord of Egypt, and overlord of Ethiopia, may I go therefore in peace." But Osiris spoke rapidly, saying, "O Pharaoh, life, health, and strength be to you. This wizard who kneels before you has with him the Ba of the child of Tansit. Yet he is the wizard who wrought such shame on him, who sat on the throne of the two lands and held the scourge and the criminal 500 years ago. Is it not right that the fight between the magic of Ethiopia and the magic of Egypt should be combated out of the surface here and now before your eyes?" Pharaoh Ramses the Great nodded his head and touched his grandson, the wonderful child Osiris, with his scepter, saying, "Kerbeb of today, surface that which the Kerbeb of 5 centuries ago began." Then to the giant Ethiopian he cried, "Black pet dog of the south, you have magic to match against the magic of Egypt. Show it now." The Ethiopian chuckled grimly. "White dog of the north," he wept, "I defy you. I have such magic at my command that presently Seth will take you as his own, and Apep, the devourer of souls, will quickly be feasting up the Ba, that of which was once a pharaoh of Egypt. Behold!" The Ethiopian waved the sealed roll just as if it had been a wand, and pointed to the floor in front of Pharaoh, muttering a great word of power. At the same time there raised up a mighty serpent hissing loudly, its forked tongue flickering evilly, and its poisoned fangs bared to kill. Pharaoh cowered back with a cry, but Osiris laughed merrily. As he raised up his hand, the giant cobra dwindled into a little white worm, which he picked up between his thumb and his first finger and cast out of the window. The Ethiopian set a shout of rage and waved his arms, spitting curses, joining incantations as he did. Simultaneously, a cloud of darkness descended upon the great hall, as black as midnight in a tomb, and as dense as the smoke of burning bodies. But Osiris laughed again. Then he took the darkness in his hands, crushed it together until it was no bigger than a ball such as children make of the dark clay beside the Nile, and tossed it out the window. The third time the Ethiopian waved his arms, and this time he yelled as if the jaws of Apep had already closed upon him. At the same time, a great sheet of fierce flame leapt up from the floor and moved on as though to consume Pharaoh and all who stood next to him on the royal dais. But Osiris chuckled for the third time. Then he blew upon the sheet of flame, and it drew back and wrapped itself around the Ethiopian. There was one great cry, and then the flame diminished and went out like a candlelight when all the wax burnt away. On the floor in front of Pharaoh lay only a little stack of ash, and Osiris said silently, "Goodbye to the child of Tansit. May his Ba dwell somewhere else forever, and come not again to the trouble of Egypt or insult the good god Pharaoh. Life, health, and strength be to him." Chapter 4. The Sphinx and the Prince. There was once a prince in Egypt called Thutmose, who was the child of Pharaoh Amenhotep, and the grandson of Thutmose III, who had successed the great queen Hatshepsut. He and many brothers and half-brothers had, just because he was Pharaoh's favorite child, they were forever and ever outlining against him. Usually, these plots were to make Pharaoh believe that Thutmose was not worthy or inappropriate to succeed him. At times, they were attempts to make the people or the priests actually believe that Thutmose was terrible or lavish or did not honor the gods, and would so make a bad ruler of Egypt, but when 2 times the plots were targeted at his very life. All this made Thutmose struggling and unhappy. He spent less and less of his time at Thebes or Memphis with Pharaoh's court, and a lot more frequently rode on explorations into Upper Egypt, or across the desert to the 7 great sanctuaries. And even when Pharaoh commanded his presence or his position demanded that he must participate in some great celebration, he would slip away any time he could with some trusted followers, and even alone and in disguise, to hunt on the edge of the desert. Thutmose was experienced in manly exercises. He was a bowman who could plant arrow after arrow in the center of the target. He was a skilled charioteer, and his horses were faster than the wind. In some cases, he would course antelopes for miles across the sandy stretches of desert, and others he would look for the savage lions in their burrows among the rocks far up the banks of the Nile. One day, when the court was in house at Memphis for the great celebration of Re at Heliopolis, several miles further down the Nile, Thutmose got away from all the pomp and pageantry to hunt on the edge of the desert. He took with him only 2 servants, and he drove his own chariot up to the high roadway past Saqqara, where the great steep pyramid of Djoser stands, and away through the scrub and stunted trees where the cultivated land by the Nile faded into the stony waste and the stretches of the sand and rock of the great Libyan desert. They set off at the first twinkle of dawn so that they may have as much time as possible before the great heat of midday. And they coursed the gazelle northwards over the desert for many miles, parallel to the Nile, but some miles away from it. By the time the sun grew too hot for hunting, Thutmose and his 2 followers had reached a point not very far from the great pyramids of Giza, which the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty had built over 1,200 years before. They stopped to rest under some palm trees, but presently Thutmose, preferring to be alone and wishing to make his prayer to the great god Harmakhis, entered his chariot and drove away over the desert, building his servants to wait on him. Away sped Thutmose, for the sand was firm and smooth, and at last he approached to the 3 pyramids of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaura, towering up to the sky, the burning sun of midday flashing on their golden peaks and flashing down the refined sides like ladders of light leading up the boat of Re as it sailed across the sky. Thutmose looked in awe at these manufactured mountains of stone. However, many of all his attention was caught by an enormous head and neck of stone that rose out of the sand between the greatest of the pyramids and a nearly buried morgue temple of square stone blocks that stood on either side of the stone causeway, leading from the distant Nile behind him right to the foot of the 2nd pyramid, that of the pharaoh Khafra. This was a gigantic carving of Harmakhis, the god of the arising sun, in the form of a lion with the head of the pharaoh of Egypt, the form he had taken when he became the hunter of the followers of Set. Khafra had triggered this sphinx to be carved out of an outcrop of sturdy rock that happened to rise above the sand near the processional causeway leading from the Nile to his great pyramid. And he had bidden his carvers shape the head and face of Harmakhis in the likeness of his own. At the time of the long centuries since Khafra had been put to rest in his pyramid, the sands of the desert had blown against the Sphinx until it was almost buried. Thutmose could see no greater than its head and shoulders, and a little ridge in the desert to mark the line of its back. For a long while he stood looking into the magnificent face of the Sphinx, crowned with the royal crown of Egypt, that had the cobra's head on its eyebrow, which kept in place the folds of embroidered linen which kept the sun from head and neck. Only here the folds were of stone, and only the head of the serpent fitted on the carved rock was of gold. The noonday sun beat mercilessly down upon Thutmose as he looked up at the Sphinx and prayed to Harmakhis to help in all his troubles. Unexpectedly, it seems to him that the great stone image started to stir. It heaved and struggled as if trying to fruitlessly shake off the sand which buried its body in paws, and the eyes were no longer sculpted stone inlaid with lapis lazuli, but shone with life and vision as they looked down upon him. Then the Sphinx talked to him in a great voice, and yet kindly as his father speaks to a child. "Look upon me, Thutmose, Prince of Egypt. I know that I am Harmakhis, your dad, the dad of all the pharaohs of the upper and lower lands. It rests with you to end up being pharaoh, certainly, and wear upon your head the double crown of South and North. It rests with you whether you or not sit upon the throne of Egypt, and whether the peoples of the world come to kneel before you in your homage. If you certainly become Pharaoh, whatever is produced by the two lands will be yours, together with the tribute from all of the countries of the world. Besides all this, long years of life, health, and strength shall be yours. Thutmose, my face is turned toward you. My heart inclines to you to bring you good things. Your spirit shall be wrapped in mine. But see how the sand is closed in around me on each side. It smothers me. It holds me down. It hides me from your eyes. Promise me that you will do all that a pretty good child needs to do for his dad. Prove to me that you certainly are my child and will help me. Approach to me. I am going to be with you always. I will guide you and make you great. Then as Thutmose stepped forward, the sun seemed to shine from the eyes of Harmachis the Sphinx so intensely that they impressed him, and the world went black and spun around him that he fell insensible on the sand. When he recuperated, the sun was sinking to the top of Kafka's pyramid, and the shadow of the Sphinx lay over him. Slowly, he rose to his feet, and the vision he had seen came rushing back into his mind as he looked at the great shape half hidden in the sand, which was already turning pink and purple at night light. Harmachis, my father, he wept, I hire you and all of the gods of Egypt to attest to my oath. If I end up being Pharaoh, the first act of my reign shall be to free this of your image from the sand and build you a shrine, to set in stone telling the sacred writing of the Kem, of your command and how I fulfilled it. Then Thutmose turned to seek his chariot, and a moment later his servants who had been anxiously searching for him came riding up. Thutmose rode back to Memphis, and from that day all matched him. Soon Amenhotep the pharaoh declared him publicly as successor to the throne, and not long later Thutmose did certainly become the king of Egypt, one of her biggest kings. This has been Egyptian Mythology, Deities, Sphinxes, and Stories from Ancient Egypt, written by Harper Van Stalen. Read for you by Chloe Jacobson. Copyright 2020 by Harper Van Stalen. Production copyright by Harper Van Stalen.